Hello and welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'm Karen McCarthy. In this edition, Science and Innovation. A New Zealander of the Year joins the call to arms for Kiwi innovators and inventors to step up and celebrate how clever we are. The cream of the crop inventions from this year's National Field Days, an annual showcase of some of the best and brightest industry developments in the farming world. We talk winners past and present. And just what does it take to get out of your spare room, the lab or your shed with a great idea or invention and make it happen? Tips from those who've been there, done that. My guests this week, scientist, social entrepreneur, inventor and 2010 New Zealander of the Year, Sir Ray Avery. Welcome. And from the National Field Days Innovations Committee, one of this year's head judges and a long-time committee member, Peter Dowd. Both of you have been through the mill in terms of having a great idea, coming up with a concept for a product and taking it to the market. How difficult is it to do that in this country, Ray?
Well, I think there's two parts to that question. The first one is how do you come up with something? How do you come up with a basic idea? One of the interesting things I find as both a social anthropologist and a scientist is how that happens. And mostly it happens from observation, one pure moment of observation. Somebody comes up with an idea that nobody else has thought of. And then, of course, once you've got that product, you need to try and sell it. And that's the next part of that is that most people make the mistake of being product-centric. They come up with that idea or that product, but they don't necessarily consider the customer in that kind of idea. But you have to be customer-centric, so you have to adapt that product or modify that idea so that it is something that customers want to buy. And most products fail in the market simply because they're a great idea, but they have no practical application for most consumers.
What is the invention you are most proud of?
The next one.
The next one.
I think inventors are by nature a very curious group of people, and if you looked back, I mean, you could argue that the one that's had the most global impact, the manufacturing technology to make low-cost intraocular lenses, by year 2020 we'll have 30 million people who've got one of those lenses using that technology. You could say, well, that's going to be your pinnacle achievement. But it would be like being an artist and saying, I've painted the Mona Lisa, so I'm not going to paint anything else. So what you do is you try and better the last thing that you've done and do things that have an even greater global impact.
Peter, tell us about your product, because I think it was about 10 years ago you went to market, or you came up with the concept of this. It sounds remarkably simple, but there wasn't one before, a knife sharpness measuring device.
That's right. I suppose, as Ray was saying, it came out of a need that I was charged with improving the average knife sharpness in the New Zealand meat industry. So the first thing I thought I'd do is talk to the experts, but there was no common consensus on what was a sharp knife and how you got one. Who
were the experts? The guy who used the knives?
The people who could sharpen knives really well.
Mm.
People generally know that Bob's a great sharpener, so ask him. But all the Bobs didn't agree. So we thought, well, we'd better measure it. There's nothing available globally, so we had to invent something. And then, so meat companies here said, well, Pete, can you make that available? So I thought, well, give it a go.
And exactly what is it? Just, I mean, you use a knife. What is it? How does this thing work?
Quite straightforward. We just take a blade, clamp the handle of the knife, and it runs down an angled slope, cuts through a standard test media, and we measure the force required to cut at different points along the blade. So it's a non-destructive test, so people can then go out, use it, see exactly what difference it makes. Well, I think what I've enjoyed most about it is that the impact it's had on the people using knives, who pretty much, if they don't keep a sharp knife, just go home saw every day for 30 years of their life. And there are tens of thousands, and there's now probably 100,000 people around the world who go home better off, not hurting.
Because both of you, I get the sense you're not doing this, you've never done this for the cash, have you? Or the kudos, though you get plenty of it, Sir Ray.
I think one of the things that we have to do as a scientific community is actually get more business in science, and I think that's one of the areas we fall down on in terms of there's no good inventing something that is only applicable for one person, for instance. So we've got to be more customer-centric and more business-orientated. We, in research in New Zealand, we publish as many research papers as any other country in the OECD. What we do better is that we do it with 1/6 of the investment. So we're very, very good at doing research. But if you translate that to what's our innovation index, that's getting products to market on a global stage, we're number 23 behind Belgium who make chocolate. So there's a big gap there.
What is the problem?
Is due to not so much that we're not good at getting things to market, but often the research we're conducting has a very long lead time for, or may never result in a commercial product. So we have to start thinking about, when we invent things, we usually invent things that we know who the customer is before we start making it. So we find an ecological niche and we fill that niche. A lot of inventions, of course, happen just by accident and necessity. The nice story of the guy who invented the fountain pen. He was, and most inventors, that's the other thing about these field days and the average inventor, they're not usually from the discipline that they invent something. They're just an ordinary bloke who sees something differently in one moment. Lewis Waterford, who invented the fountain pen, he was an investment broker, and he was going in to sign a contract, and the pen that he was given just made a whole blot over the contract. So he went back to his office to print off a new contract. By the time he got back, the contract had been given to somebody else. So he vowed that would never happen and started to make a better fountain pen. So he wasn't a designer or an engineer, but he just went into his office and started playing with little bits of straw and worked out how to do it properly.
And how did you're a mechanical engineer, I think you said, by trade or degree. So how did you come to stumble across or come up with this idea for the knife sharpness measuring device?
As I say, it was just a matter of trying to solve the problem. It was a tool I needed to perform the research on what was the best way of sharpening knives.
Were you astonished to find out there wasn't anything available worldwide that could do this job?
I was. I expected to find something in the States available for $59.95, and I'd bring it in and I'd be away. So yes, I was actually surprised. But I suppose that's how it goes. In hindsight, it always seems an obvious idea, and why didn't anyone else ever do it? One thing I suppose I think hinders the development of successful business out of research as well is sometimes an over expectation of either what you can get out of selling a product or what's involved in making a successful product and a successful business out of research. And what you're saying, Ray, I think is really true. Often our research is not directed from the goal of trying to come up with something that people will purchase. In essence, if someone isn't willing to purchase something, whether a service or a product, then really you just don't have a business, no matter how cool and wonderful it is. And that's something that I think is really important for scientists, for even those trying to determine what types of projects will be funded. It's really important to understand that. It's hard to pick winners, and I think that's also a bit of a challenge. But yeah, I think this idea of there is quite a lot involved. The customer is really important, but sometimes it's actually a little bit easier than people expect. I don't know what your experience has been, Ray, but I've found that there's an expectation that it should be easy, or you're doing it, or it will never work. And yet, the number of people I know it's been 10 years to become an overnight success. You've lived out of the garage, you've nearly gone broke twice. And it does require just that perseverance, really.
We'll pick up on that after the break. Coming up, putting New Zealand's education under the microscope. How does our research and innovation track record stack up? And should we be doing more? Stay with Straight Talk. Hello, I'm Karen McCarthy and you're back with Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow and our guests Sir Ray Avery and Peter Dowd. What Peter was saying just before the break, you said once upon a time, a project has to be based on business DNA. That's what he's saying, I guess, isn't it?
Well, I think, I agree that if you expect that just because you've come up with a great idea that it's going to be universally accepted, it's a misnomer. A good example is, and this has got two parts to it in terms of its relevance for us in New Zealand. There was a nice pharmacist from Timaru called Colin Murdoch, and he was sitting at his kitchen bench one day, and his big pen stopped working. So he pulled it apart to see what was wrong, and you could see the little plastic tube. And he thought, if I can put a piston in that, I can invent the plastic disposable hypodermic syringe. So it wasn't a multinational drug company, it was an ordinary pharmacist from Timaru who invented a global changing healthcare product. Before that, we were washing out glass syringes and, it's the same needle, sterilising them. And so this is now a multi-billion-dollar disposable medical device industry. But of course, he only patented it in New Zealand, so it wasn't picked up, and the value of it wasn't realised in New Zealand, but the Americans got it and ran with it. In fact, one of the obstacles was that when he first took his invention to one of the district health boards in Auckland and said, look, I've made this plastic disposable hypodermic syringe, in 1953 they said, it's far too futuristic and we'll never find common use. So it's that kind of story that changing customer trends is actually quite difficult. It actually can occur from either being driven by the industry itself, which is what happened with the addition of screw caps to bottles. They didn't get a choice because it was an economical driver that said the corks cost too much money, the profit in cheap wines in a cork, we'll put a screw cap on. But generally you have to change people's behaviour, even with knife sharpening or whatever, and that's the hardest part, is actually management of change. You've got a great idea, but you have to invest a lot of money to get people to do things in a different way.
Now, you clearly identified your market when you set out and realised there was a big market and a global market potentially for this product.
Yes, I wouldn't say a big market, but a global market. In fact, I think the niche aspect of it has been an advantage that's enabled us to stay in business. It hasn't been so big that one of the big boys internationally just jumped straight in and there'd be no way we'd compete. So that I think has been part of the reason why we've been able to succeed.
You're talking about the market. Your market is predominantly North America, is that right, as well as New Zealand?
Yes, that's right. That's right. The market is global, but so far we've had most success in North America. Our best customer is the largest protein producer in the world, and other large companies are in there.
And are these basically meat workers, meat processors?
Essentially meat processors, poultry, pork, fresh meats. But we've also got customers who do potato fries, scalpels, biopsy needles, all sorts of things really, so long as it needs to be sharp and it's kind of like a blade, yeah.
Have you been surprised at the success? I don't know, do you doubt yourself sometimes at the early stage when you're launching a product or you come up with this idea? Are you plagued with doubt, self-doubt along the way?
Probably two things came for me. One is confidence that the product was good, although every time you go to demonstrate it, you're half expecting it to fail. And the other is having a complete ignorance on how to sell anything. I came from a technical background, which probably most inventors would, and trying to get through this process of how do you help somebody to get to the point of making a decision to purchase. And that was something that took years to pick up those skills. That's probably the greatest self-doubt has been, is trying to get to the point of being confident in that part of the process.
Ray, you've said New Zealand is a country of geniuses. Our problem, we don't tell people that we're good at stuff. Is that changing?
Well, I'm trying to change it. I don't think it would change without any activities around that area, and that's why we've got the Science Festival down in Dunedin, and that's why we've got the innovation competition to try and get people out of the sheds. And there are so many people in New Zealand who produce game-changing technology on the global stage, and we simply don't know who they are. So to try and fix that, I've got a book coming out in November. It's a Random House book, and it's called The Power of Us, New Zealanders Who Dare to Dream. And it profiles 50-plus New Zealanders, many of which people will not have heard of. It's not a litany of scientists, it's across a whole discipline of arts and science. But to give two examples, there's a chap in there called Bill Buckley, and most people in New Zealand would never have heard of Bill Buckley. But every single person in New Zealand pretty much will have been touched by his driving technology. He makes electromagnets which are used for the production of PC, IC chips, and he's got 80% of the global market, and nobody knows that he exists. There's a young guy called Peter Beck. He is otherwise known as Rocket Man. He's got a rocket lab down in Parnell. He sent off a rocket into interstellar space from the Hauraki Gulf with a bit of funding from Michael Fay, and he's now got a contract with NASA because he came out with a better rocket fuel that's much more efficient. Now, the important thing is, what I was trying to understand with the book was, do we have an innate DNA that makes us special, or is there something else? It actually is there's something else. It's the fact that we can. Nobody's going to stop you. You couldn't put a rocket up in interstellar space in pretty much any other country in the world because NASA would complain, or the air traffic controllers complain. We can in New Zealand. You just have to give it a go. And it is that open source that enables people like Bill Buckley to play around in his workshop and come up with this innovative technology for these electromagnets. We've got people like LanzaTech who are got some micro biotechnology for cleaning up carbon emissions from plants in China, Japan and India. And this is a multi-billion-dollar possible investment business. And he's got funding, but nobody knows that that's going on. So we thought we should actually showcase these things and say, look, we do have a huge footprint on the world stage, but we don't tell anybody. Colin Murdoch, for instance, who changed global healthcare, nobody knows who he is.
No one's probably ever heard of his name. Yeah, Colin Murdoch, we should remember that, yeah. The man who invented the syringe, the disposable syringe.
Yeah. So we should be proud of these things. And I think what I'm trying to do is encourage people to come out of the workshops and the sheds and say, I think some people are you know, particularly, we do have this iconic kind of Kiwi shuffling, very quiet hero kind of dynamic, and that it's not, you know, correct protocol to wowsers about what you do. But if we don't start showing the world that we're good at this stuff, then nothing will change. We have the opportunity to be the innovation centre of the Asia-Pacific region. Some technology that came out of the University of Auckland with conductive and inductive charging, which means you can charge your car without actually having to plug it in. That was invented in New Zealand, or commercialised in New Zealand, then sold to a multinational conglomerate. So what I'd like to see, though, is money being invested in companies and businesses that will bring jobs to New Zealand. So in other words, instead of selling the technology that was hard won, that we understand the value of what we've got and try and generate local manufacturing out of that.
Going it alone is something I know that you, Peter, said you realised early on you couldn't do. You've got to get out there, you've got to find the right people to help you along this track.
Yes, I think you do have to be able to share. And that's something I myself had to learn.
And trust others.
Trust people. You need to be able to share the rewards so that you can't, well, it's extremely difficult to succeed if you want to get everything yourself, 100% of the rewards yourself. You need to be willing to share that, whether that's sharing it with employees or sharing it with suppliers or sharing it with the customer even, or with investors. You need to be able to help other people to be able to get some reward as well. And then people can help you, because you can't really do it alone. You do need to get that help.
Thanks, gentlemen. More in store after the break, including some of the Innovation Award winners from Field Days and final advice on making it here and on the world stage. Stay with Straight Talk. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. We're here with Peter Dowd and Sir Ray Avery. Peter, let's talk Field Days. You were a chief judge and a long-time committee member on the Innovation Awards. Tell us about some of the most promising inventions or innovations we saw this year.
Sure. Well, we had there's three particular ones I'd like to bring out. One is the overall winner, which was a very innovative way of protecting people on four-wheelers from crush injuries when they roll over. Interesting, instead of having something solid that it was actually flexible, so that if the bar itself rolled on top of the driver, it wouldn't crush the driver.
Now this was a Dargaville farmer came up with this, didn't he? Vernon Suckling, I've heard of him.
Yeah. Exactly, just fantastic. But similarly, also, not quite the other end of the scale, because still somebody on the farm, but a 12-year-old girl came up with an idea to make it a lot simpler to carry around, the portable electric fence standards and reels. And what we particularly liked about that is the way she'd done it in a very mature way. And that she'd researched the topic, the options, before finalising on a solution that she brought to field days. We just find that we were actually really pleased that people are doing that more and more, that we've seen over a real progression over the time that I've been involved over the last 5-6 years, that more and more the people are coming with having done that customer research, a little bit more market research. That's something that in the judging panel, we really like to be able to help people on that side. Normally they will know more about the problem than we do, because that's why they've come up with something, was to fix a problem. But what we like to do is help them to, if possible, make a successful business out of it. And the field days is a fantastic opportunity to test the market. So if someone has an idea, we can talk to them and say, well, here's an opportunity. You might not know how to price this yet. What is it worth? You know, you might know what it costs, but what is it actually worth? And they have that opportunity to get that feedback.
How many of these rural inventions, and you must have seen many over the years you've been involved in, I know the contest has run for nearly 40 years, backyard creations and commercial innovations, how many of these will actually make it to market, I wonder?
That's a hard question. I think the general rule of thumb is to be successful in business, the numbers, they're not necessarily that flash. But we've seen quite a few come through, and what we really like is that, for example, the winner of the Equipment Award this time, with that e-feeder, he started out as an invention. He then came again with another innovation, and this time he's actually developed that each time, taken the advice, worked, he's had some sales, and now he's got to the point where he had something that we feel could become best practice in the industry with the e-feeder. And that's fantastic from our point of view, because here's someone who, if he hadn't had that input at the beginning, probably wouldn't have gone anywhere, but he's listened, he's taken that advice, and now, you know, I think he's got a really good show. As
you guys both say, it's a lot of work, years of work to become an overnight success. Anyone who's heading down this path, it's going to be a long haul.
One of the things that you have to do is communicate with broad audience in terms of these inventions. To broaden the audience, there's some technology in the UK which is a new pod. It's called a pod, and it's like a safety seat for a kid. And basically, it's like an ordinary conventional seat. But when it's in a crash, this hood comes over and completely envelops the child. And you can almost imagine if you took that, if instead of building each individual vehicle with a roll cage, you have this portable seat that has the same philosophy. You screw that on to your quad bike or your car, and you know, so it's the future. And if you roll over, this thing just you know, comes over. So it's about talking to people. I love the fact, one of the things that we don't do enough of is actually go out into the market and see what opportunities there are in the rest of the world. And I'm lucky because I spend probably a third of my life in the developing world, and there's huge opportunities for us in New Zealand, both in agriculture and science and technology, in terms of what we can offer people in developing countries. The things that we've learned in agriculture have been hard-won, can be applied to those emerging nations like China and certainly India. So there's great opportunities, but we need to have a much better communication system.
How much of a driver too is to do good? It's not just about making money, it's about doing good, it's about improving life for people.
Well, from our perspective, of course, that's 100% of what we do. We're addressing things that in the area of healthcare, which nobody else is. We're trying to make global healthcare accessible to everybody. One of the initiatives we've just launched in New Zealand is the New Zealand Health Innovation Hub, which is an agglomeration of district health boards. And what we're trying to do, and these are multi-billion-dollar businesses, you know, when you put them all together, we're looking at ways of how can we reduce hospital stays and clinical care. So, for instance, a hearing aid costs $3,000, but there's no reason why it should cost $3,000. And we can come up with OEM manufacturing that might produce these things for $300 or $400 of the same quality, and maybe make them locally in New Zealand. So we're doing things that the multinational companies aren't addressing and trying to find those ecological niches. But I think there's a huge stockpile of technology that's in our current technology systems in agriculture. People know stuff, but they don't necessarily tell the guy next door. When you get these two people talking, they suddenly say, I've got one of those, but you should try this because I found that works better.
You've got to get out there, you've got to get out of your shed, as you say, out of the lab and shout it from the rooftops. Thank you very much. You've been watching Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Thanks to my guests, Peter Dowd and Sir Ray Avery, and as always to you at home for watching. If you'd like to get in touch, check out the Country 99 TV website for details on Straight Talk and all our other programs. I'm Karen McCarthy. See you next time for more Straight Talk.